Okay,
Right.
just sort of a show of hands. How many of you are using, and I don't see half of the hands here, but a show of hands, how many of you are using Lightroom already? All right. Any of you confused by Lightroom? I'm keeping my hand up because it's just too deep. I don't know everything about Lightroom. Hopefully, I'm going to share some quick tips and tricks with you guys that will help you and try to explain some of the new masking techniques that they've introduced in the last release. So Lightroom is much more than an hour and a half presentation. So I'm probably not going to give you everything you need. Hopefully, we have some time at the end of my presentation so we can open it up and you can share and teach me also. So I'm always willing to learn some new tricks, techniques, and shortcuts in all these programs. The write-up said that we're going to compare Photoshop and Lightroom a little bit. Hopefully we have some time to do that. But like I said, 1 hour, an hour and a half is, just scratching the surface of either of those programs. So I better get started. I'm going to move you guys up to my second monitor. So if I look at you, I'm going to look up away from Lightroom and I'm going to share my screen. If I can, let's see, Lightroom Classic. All right, so everybody see Lightroom?
Yeah.
Okay, let me move you guys up to the top monitor again. So you're off of my monitor. Okay, I'm going to maximize Lightroom so it might blink at you a second. All right, now what I've done here is I've just picked a few images from my catalog, and to do that I put them in a collection. So if you've never done that, that's something I want to show you right now. You're in your library. You can create collections. That way I don't have to show you my entire catalog and I don't have to find these 12 images I'm going to use this evening. So I have the BPS demo collection over there. And to add anything to a collection, you can create a new collection, just drag them from your library into that collection. They're not going to move the location of the images, but you can find those collections very quickly that way. All right, so that's how I'm going to find just those couple images that I'm going to use. Okay, so this is the first one I'm going to use. Now, what we have here is we have some new tools, the masking tools. Now, the masking tools replace the old adjustment brush. The adjustment brush wasn't true masking. Now they've sort of given us masking. And if you weren't in here earlier, we were discussing the differences quickly. Photoshop is better at masking than Lightroom. But Lightroom gives you a quick way of doing adjustments. Lightroom is faster at doing the adjustments. Photoshop is better at doing the selections themselves. So we need to go into the development module to get into these adjustments. Let me collapse that left panel over there. All right. Now we all have already used probably the basic panel over here on the right-hand side. The basic panel gives you global adjustments. So I've already added some global adjustments to this image.
Wait a minute, Bob. All we see is white.
Why do you only see white?
I don't see your image. I saw the thumbnail of it, but I don't see your image.
All right.
What you actually have to do, Bob, is share your desktop.
All right, let me stop the share and I'll do it again.
Yeah, I found this out when I was trying to work with somebody on Lightroom.
This would be desktop.
That if you just share the window,
oh, okay.
It treats it as a separate window. There you go.
Okay.
Much better. Thank you. You got it now.
Thanks, Jeff. See, we do need Jeff.
That's my contribution.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So what I have here is I have an image that's just, nothing groundbreaking here, but what I want to do is I want to enhance the sky a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to show you is just the sky selection tools. So anything that you do in the basic panel over here, those are going to be global adjustments. So for instance, if I change the exposure, it's going to change the exposure for the entire image. But what we want to do is we want to work on just part of the image, and that's where you get into the masking tools. Now, the masking tools are a little bit different in the previous versions, and also they're a little bit different in the desktop version. So I'm working in Lightroom Classic. The Lightroom Classic would be your desktop version of it. And we have the masking tools. These are your adjustment tools up here. You have your cropping tool. Let me just show you the cropping tool real quick. So I did crop this just slightly. And the rule of thirds are the default overlay. But if you hit the O key on your keyboard, that'll toggle you through the different overlays for the cropping tool. So it's already been cropped. You have your spot healing brush. So if you have dust spots, which I always have dust spots, that's a way of getting rid of dust spots, telephone lines, things like that. But tonight we're going to be concentrating on the fourth button over here, and this is your masking tool. The masking tool looks like a gray circle with a dotted line around it. So when I click on that, it'll open up the masking panel. And right now there is no mask in this project. If I already had a mask, it would also open the mask panel, which you're going to see in a moment. So these first two masks up here, these are fairly new. They've been in Photoshop before, but they moved these techniques over into Lightroom just recently. So the select sky is one way of selecting the sky. And I'm going to show you the difference between the select sky and the luminance range in this exercise. So if I just click on select sky, it uses the AI, artificial intelligence, and it's going to go in and try to find the sky. And it's obvious where the sky is in this image. And by default, it's going to show the overlay, and it's going to give you this red overlay. I'm going to change the overlay color and the overlay presentation in a moment, but I'm going to zoom in with Control Plus. I'm on a Mac. That would be a Command Plus, I'm sorry. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And just to show you, it's not as intelligent as it should be. It's missing the little pieces of sky inside of the branches down here. So what it's going to try to do is going to try to find that big open sky and a hard edge that it can mask along. So the problem here is if I change the exposure, for instance, it's going to leave like all these little bright spots in the trees. So it does a really good job if you don't over exaggerate like I did right here. So I can bring down the exposure of just the sky. Let me use Control minus to zoom back out. And this is not a global adjustment. This is just adjusting where we've selected. So when you're talking about masking in Lightroom, you're really doing selections. So if you can see this right here, this is my masking panel, and I pulled it out so it's floating. You can dock it over here, and this is how most people see it. It's docked over on the right-hand side. But for this, I want to move it over here so we can see where our masks are. When you're doing a mask, anything that's white is going to be selected. So you can see this little mask right here. When I selected the sky is white, and the rest of the little mask here is black. So anything that's white is being selected or open in the mask. So that's really what you're doing. That term really throws me because masking usually means hiding. But in this case, when you mask something, you're selecting that area. Right. Now, the problem here is it wasn't smart enough to pick up all these little pieces down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all those masks. Right. So the masking panel disappears because there aren't any masks that exist anymore. So instead of using the select sky, I'm going to use luminance range. And luminance range will pick up a range of brightness in your image. So I'm going to change from luminance range. What you have to do is you have to select the luminance. I'm not going to choose just one. I want to select a range of brightness. And I'm just going to go like this across the sky because I want those blues and those whites, not just the whites of the clouds. It's going to work. And it's done a little bit better job in these little spots down here because that's within that luminance range. But there's also some parts of my image that are within that range too. So it's selected some of the trees down here and some of the grasses down below. And to be able to see that, I'm going to go to this triple dot button in the bottom of the masking panel because the default setting is a color overlay. So right now it's showing us a red color overlay where the mask is. It's a little bit easier to see what it's doing in this case if I go to white on black. Right. Remember what I said, anything that's white is selected. So anything that's white is open in this mask. And I want all of these little pieces down here to be open because that's part of the sky, but I don't want it to pick up all these bright parts of the trees down here. So the next thing I want to do is I want to subtract from this mask. I want to subtract what is selected. So I'm going to use the subtract button. So it's done the luminance range. It says mask 1. Here's a tip. Always name your masks because it's going to say mask 1, mask 2, copy of mask 1, and so forth. So if you double click on the word mask 1, we can name that. This is going to be my sky mask. I'm just going to call it sky. Click on OK. It's going to be a lot easier to be able to identify which mask is doing what if we name them. Right, so I need to subtract, so I'm going to choose the subtract button. And I can subtract using any of these masking techniques. I'm going to subtract using a brush. When I turn on the brush masking tool, over here on the right-hand side, my brush options are turned on. Okay, we're going to use the auto mask a little bit later, but right now I'm going to turn it off. I'll be able to explain that a little bit better in the next image. I'm going to turn the auto mask off, and I'm subtracting with this brush. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to start painting. You can think of it as painting. And remember, anything that's black is going to be hidden or not selected. This is much easier in Photoshop because the brush and the painting tools are faster in Photoshop. So I need to get rid of all of this. Yeah, something like that. I'm going to leave those little pieces up there open because remember that's pieces of sky poking through. I'm using my space bar to pan around. Okay, what I want to do is I want to work on the luminance range mask. And I'm subtracting. And I need to paint all this down here. Now that I could have done that a lot faster in Photoshop with the big, select and fill. The brush tool is fairly fast here if I use the big brush. I need to move up a little bit again and get all this because I don't want to adjust all this grass down below, but that's within that brightness range, that luminous range. And the AI wasn't smart enough to say, I only want the blue of the sky. Okay, so now I got a sky mask. I need to paint it down here a little bit, paint it down there a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to switch back over to the color overlay. And let me scroll up here. Now I have the luminance range mask right here. And here's my subtract icon down here. So when I pass over those little pins, it's going to show me those overlays separately. Okay, so we have two masks and one is subtracting from the other. Okay, so now I have what I want to adjust. I want to bring the exposure down. I can dehaze it. I can bring the highlights down. I'm going to go overboard so you can see what I'm doing. And the difference between the select sky and the select luminance range is it's working on those little peaks of sky in between the branches right there. So if I would have just said, okay, find the sky, it would have stopped at the top edge of the trees. Here it's picking up the blue that's peeking through. So the sky selection technique is really quick and easy, and it does a pretty good job until you get some of this kind of stuff happening here, right? Okay, so that covers the sky, select sky. It covers the luminance range quickly and the subtract, and I'm subtracting with the brush. So anything I do over here is only affecting what's selected. And remember, what's selected is what's white. So if I go back over to the triple dot button at the bottom of my mask panel and show white on black, and I got to select it, okay, these are the areas that it's selecting is anything that's white. All right, any questions so far? Okay, now to close this, I just click on the same masking button over here. And now anything I do under the basic tab or the detail or anything else is a global setting. So again, if I take the exposure up and down, it's going to add that exposure edit to the entire image. it's going to make the sky even darker because the mask already is bringing the exposure down. Okay, so that's the sky. All right. Now, the other thing that, a lot of landscape photographers do is what they'll do is they'll use this technique down here. It's under the effects tab. And a lot of people will do a vignette. Okay, and that's been done so often that it starts to look fake after a while. When you're using that, maybe you only want to vignette the bottom part and not the whole way around. Dave, you had a question? Hands up.
If you use that sky select to make the mask, and then you click add, can you switch tools and then go to luminance and will that add to the mask, or do you have to just start over?
What I did was I scrapped the sky because it couldn't get all those little pieces, and to add it with a brush or something else, it's going to be a lot of work. So the luminance mask to start does a better job than the sky. Right now, if you have a building that has a real hard edge, it'll find the sky real easily. It's when it starts to get confusing, especially if the edges is kind of blended and soft. It tends to do a halo around it. Now, if you don't push the exposure to extremes like I did, it's not going to be noticeable to most people. But the luminance mask in this case, I think does a better job than just the straight up sky mask. Yep. Okay, so this vignette, a lot of people will use that, and that just focuses your attention in the middle. But sometimes you don't want all four corners. So what you'll do here is you'll take the masking tool. So I'm going to go back to the masking tools. I'm going to create a new mask, and you can use the radial gradient. And the radial gradient is basically masking in a circle or an oval. I'm going to use Control- to make it smaller. Okay, now the radial gradient, the pin in the middle, you can move the gradient around. You can size it on the height and width. And this inside circle right here, and I got to go find it over here, is the feathering. So if I feather it more or less, it gets a harder edge to that gradient. And that's that inside circle. So I can move that inside circle in and out with that little pin. And you can see the feather over on the right-hand side of my screen. It's changing. And it doesn't have to be contained inside the image. We can squish it, squash it. So we're only darkening down the bottom edge. And we can move it up a little bit. All right, so I'm going to take the exposure. Whoops, I'm in the wrong panel here. I want to take the exposure, if I can scroll through it. And for some reason, I can't get it. All right, I'm going to throw it away. There we go. All right. So I'm just darkening down the bottom corners because this is outside the corners up here. So instead of using the vignette and doing all four corners, you can use that technique. So it just gives the front end a little bit of dark. All right, I'm going to switch over to this image. And this is just to show you, I want to change the sky and the foreground in 2 steps. Okay, so this time I am going to go over to the masking tools, select the sky. So I'm using the select sky technique here again. It's smart enough to catch the sky. Let me do the color overlay so we can see it. So it's catching all the sky. And that's why. And now I'm confused because I can't find, there it is. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. Hold on. I told you I didn't know everything. Yeah, I want to work in the basics. So I didn't have the basics open. I had the effects open. Okay, let me select the sky again. All right. And I want to All right, this is the first time this has happened to me. Tint temp. We don't want that. Anybody have, there it is. That little arrow up there was collapsed. So I collapsed the masking.
I
Okay,
don't
so
know
I'm
how
gonna,
that happened. Boy, I was looking at thinking, what is wrong? Good job
Yeah.
finding that, Bob. Thank you for showing us, because you know that could happen to one of us and we wouldn't know what happened.
because this down here is still global. That's the
That's
basics.
global.
That's
Okay.
the basics.
It's
Yeah.
that little arrow.
Yep. So I somehow I collapsed that by accident. That's the first time I've ever had that happen. All right. So what I want to do is I want to adjust the sky. So I already have it masked, and maybe I bring down the highlights, open up the exposure, dehaze it some. Okay, and I didn't have it selected. Okay, bring down the highlights, add some clarity, dehaze it, whatever I want to do over here. And it's only affecting the sky. Okay, so the sky mask, let's name it sky. All right, so I can toggle the sky mask on and off with this little eyeball right here in the masking panel. So I can turn it off and turn it on to see what it's doing. Let me push the exposure way up so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. Now I want to work on the bottom part of this. And instead of doing another selection, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the sky mask and duplicate it. Okay, so it says sky copy. That's going to get confusing, so I'm going to call that one foreground. And I know I misspelled it. Okay, so foreground is the mask I'm working on now. What I want to do, it's still working on the sky. I'm going to come over here to the panel and invert it. I'm going to reverse it. So now it's working on the foreground instead of the sky. So you can invert the mask. And down here, maybe I open up the shadows and do whatever I need to do to the foreground. Okay, so now I got the foreground mask, I got the sky mask, and each one has its own settings over here, right? I can, before and after, so I can toggle the masks off. There's a little tiny toggle switch in the upper left-hand corner of the masking panel right here. So I can toggle all the masks on or off, or I can just toggle on and off the individual mask with the eyeball right here. They both have their own pin. Okay, so the foreground and the sky are actually made out of the exact same mask. So when I toggle over the masks over here, it shows me the overlay. Since the foreground was made out of the sky, they're both in the same pin and they're on top of each other. Right? So that's a way of inverting your mask. Okay. We're going to use the same technique, but a little bit more complex in this one. This is a dumb little image I had to take for a client, and it was underexposed because it was on a light table. All right. Now, some of these have already been edited in the basic panel over here. This one doesn't have any kind of basic global settings done to it yet. So what I want to do here is I want to select the subject. So select subject, it's going to try to find the hard edge subject in this image. And it does a pretty good job, but I use this because it's confused. It's confused by a little bit of that gray background and these lighter pieces of gummy in here. It's not going to find them. So I'm going to choose the select subject mask tool. It's going to work. It's going to go and try to find the subject. Now I have that overlay turned on right now. So the show overlay is turned on and I have the color overlay turned on. And you can see in here, it's red, a little bit of red in there because those areas weren't quite pure white. And it didn't pick up this blue gummy and it didn't pick up all of this green one right here. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in with Control plus. Spacebar I'm using to toggle a little bit. Right, so I need to add this one. I need to add this green one, and I need to add this green one up here. So with that mask selected, I'm going to use the add button. And I'm going to use the brush again. Right, so over here are your brush settings. So when you choose a brush, it has a size, it has a feathering. So if I take my brush in here, you see that inside circle? There's an inside circle against the outside circle. That's the feather effect. Okay, it also has a flow, which is how much paint in this case, you can think of it as that, how strong the brush is going to be and how dense your mask is going to be. So I have those fairly high. I'm going to leave it feathered right about there. And I need to turn on auto mask. What the auto mask does, it tries to find strong edges. So with the auto mask turned on this time, as long as I keep that crosshair in the middle of the gummy, it's going to try to go out and find the edge. If I take that crosshair outside, it's going to find the white out here. So if I just use it like this, you can see, even though that brush is bigger than the gummy, it's not going outside the edge. And that's because auto mask is turned on. And I can come on down here and use it down on this green. As long as I keep the crosshair in the middle or inside the edge of the gummy, it's going to do a pretty good job. I'm going to move this out of the way, and there's one more up here. All right. Now that's fine because, it finds the edge of the gummy, but what's really cool is when I go to the subtract. So I need to subtract because it's also selecting this inside here, that white area. So if I turn on the subtract and I use a brush to subtract, okay, so now I have brush 1, which is the add. I have the new brush, which is the subtract. The auto mask is turned on, and I can go in here and just sort of wipe in here. And as long as I keep it inside that white area, it's going to go up to the edge of the gummy. That's because the auto mask is turned on. If I make my brush smaller, and I'm using my left square bracket key to make the brush smaller, I can get in these little spaces right here, if I'm careful. As long as I don't go into the gummy, it's going to find that edge. As long as I keep it in between. And I could zoom in and get even more detailed. I can do it over here. As long as I don't touch the gummy, I stay in those spaces in between. That's the auto mask with the brush. So the auto mask is turned on. So let's see if I can get in between there. Okay. I'd never be able to do this if we didn't have that auto mask. So it's like what auto mask is saying is find hard edges. Okay. So I'm using it on the subtract brush right here. And again, the space bar, I can toggle through here. Here's some down here. I can do the same thing down here. As long as I keep it outside the gummies, it's going to try to find the white edge. That's really what I wanted to show you was the auto mask and the subtract and add with the brush.
Is there anything like Photoshop where you have the lasso and you can draw around the shape to add and subtract?
Nope.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, you have better selection tools in Photoshop. And
Okay.
the one thing that I really miss that's in Photoshop, those of you who use Photoshop, you can adjust the edges, the selection and masking. You can adjust them. And you have a rectangle tool. You don't have that here. So if you wanted to select something with a rectangle, there is no rectangle tool. I'll show you a workaround, but
Yeah.
there's no rectangle. There's no hard edge pencil tools, things like that. I know. Ginny showed us the custom brushes. You just have a round brush here. You can't flatten it. You can't get all kinds of crazy shapes with it. So in Photoshop, what I do to do the same thing, I'd flatten the brush and try to get in between. Here's just a round brush. I can't really flatten the brush unless somebody knows that trick. I don't think it has it. Okay, so
There's a
with the
question in the chat for you. Bob.
okay, that's Jay's job.
Oh,
Yeah,
What's-
thank you for pointing that out. Charlie has a question. If the brush is made bigger, much bigger, and you click the white area, would it then clean up all the white area without trying to stay in the lines of the gummies?
Maybe, but the problem is you're probably gonna hit too many edges. So what he's saying is if I make this brush gigantic, I'm just hitting the the bright square bracket now to make it bigger. Actually, that does work. I did try it earlier. Let me see if I can find some here. I got most of it cleaned up now. Yeah, if you hit the white here, 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 it'll try to go in and find it. Yeah, it did a decent job right there, but there's still a little bit of red in between. That's a good tip. Okay. Yeah, let's see if we can
I
get it there.
got a feeling future versions of this will be
It's
better
almost-
and better.
It's almost like the magic wand back in Photoshop, if you
Yeah.
use it that way. Yep. All right, let me zoom back out. All right, so we have the gummies selected, all right? And what I want to do is I want to, open up the exposure a little bit with the gummies. Okay, and you can add contrast, you can bring down the highlights, open the shadows, but this is only affecting the gummies, right? And I'm going to name that gummies. Okay, so instead of mask 1, I named it gummies. We're going to duplicate it. This is going to be background.
So when you're first approaching.
This is something I forget to do all the time. So I have mask 1, mask 2, and it's always difficult to know what's going on. Okay, and this one, the background, again, I want to, if I can find it, I want to invert it, right? The problem is the gummies was made up of the select subject and the add brush and subtract brush. So I go to the subject mask and I invert it. Okay. But the problem here is I also have the brush one, which is it's still adding, and the negative brush, which is still subtracting, but it's subtracting and adding the wrong spots. So what you need to do here is you need to convert this to add and convert this one to subtract. So now it's working correctly. And let's take the exposure and bring it down. Okay, so now it's only working in the background. See, if I hadn't done this, it would have still been the same brush. So I need to convert both of those, not just the subject one. So if I invert subject one, I have to convert these to subtract and add also. So it's more 3 steps instead of just one inverse. All right, so that's just using the auto mask brush to add and subtract. All right.
Now, Bob, when you have a pin, you can move that pin anywhere you want. Is that
Right.
correct?
Right.
Okay.
But the problem here is if I move this is my subject pin. That one doesn't move because that's the artificial intelligence. So it's still finding the subject. This brush, okay, that's kind of brushed on, but you can see I'm moving it now. So I'm moving those weird brush spots. So you want to be careful of just grabbing the pin by accident, because I'm moving that brush, I'm moving all that brushed area to the wrong spot. Right. Okay. The next masking tool, let me turn this off and zoom in. Next masking tool is the radial mask. So I'm going to go back to the mask tool, use the radial gradient. I'm going to try to, shape it the right shape. I got to move the pin. Excuse me, sir. And yeah, I didn't notice that before. All right, so now what I have is I have an oval. The nice thing about Photoshop is you can distort that oval. Okay, here it's either a round or an oval. You can't make it wider at the top and narrow at the bottom. It's just a radial gradient. Okay, what I want to do is I want to darken down the background. So I'm going to invert it. I'll just take the exposure down, or maybe take the highlights down. Okay, so I took the exposure down by 4 stops. And I took the highlights down by -100. And really what I want is I want that to be almost totally black in the background. So what I can do is I can duplicate this again. Okay, duplicate the mask 1. And now I have the exposure 8 stops. Okay, so these sliders only go so far. So I can bring it down, a little bit darker if I duplicate it on top of itself and then just bring the exposure down even further. And same with the highlights or the shadows, right? Or the blacks. Okay, so I have one mask on top of the other. They're both doing the same thing. They're bringing down the exposure, bringing down the highlights, but the first one's bringing it down by 4 stops. The second one's bringing it down by 1.8 on top of that. Okay, so if you can't get it strong enough, you can just duplicate it and lay it on top of each other. Now, the top one, I'm gonna pull out a little bit and feather it. It's probably too strong. Okay, so let me bring it down just a little bit. And this is something you can do down here also with these masks. You can colorize, or you can add a tint to it. So down at the bottom down here, we have the color. Right now, it's not adding any color. It has a cross hatch in it. I'm going to click on it and maybe give it a little bit of a blue tint. Or let's make it pink so you can see it. And how strong that tint is going to be is this saturation slider down here. Again, in Photoshop, you have more options for this type of thing, but here you can just tint, and it's tinting in that radial gradient. So this is the one that's on top. So it's giving me this, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but it's giving me a pinkish tint on top of the darker background now. All right, so that's another thing you can add to any of your masks as a color tint. Now to remove it, you click on that color again and just bring the saturation the whole way down to 0, and it'll give you that X again. There's no on and off here. You just bring the saturation the whole way down. And now it's not adding any color again. So if you wanted to give, if you wanted to fake like a midnight sky, you can bring the exposure down and add a little bit of that blue tint to that midnight sky instead of just making it a pure black. Right. So that's one on top of the other again. Okay. Next one, this is to show you that it's not that smart. Okay. I'm going to use the select subject. And it's going to find the hardest edges that it can find. So it's not smart enough to know that this is the body of the chicken out here. It's just finding this hard edge. What is that called? The crown, the beak. Okay. And I know that this is part of that rooster, and I need to have that selected also. So here I'm going to use the add. I'm going to use the brush again. And somebody made me make that brush way too big. Now in this case, I am going to use the auto mask around the edge because I wanted to find this edge out here. And I'm going to make it smaller. I'm hitting the left square bracket key to make the brush smaller. And I'm going to add, and I'm going to go right along this edge right here. And it does a pretty good job there because that's a pretty strong edge. And I'm going to go down the front side of the body down here. Now it's having a little bit of problem finding the subject here because we have the black spots, white spots, but if I get close enough to the edge, it does a pretty good job of finding those feathered edges. That's because that auto mask is turned on. Now I need to fill in the rest of this rooster's body. And if I use the auto mask turned on, it's going to give me these speckles. So I'm going to turn it off now because I just want to use it as a brush now. And I'm just going to brush it in. Okay, I don't have to be careful in here, so I'm going to turn off the auto mask and just start brushing all this in. I need a bigger brush.
One question, Bob, was once you make these masks, can you lock them so you don't accidentally move them?
I think we can underneath here. I might be thinking of Photoshop again.
Yeah.
Good question. I'm not sure. We should be able to, but I'm not sure. Okay. All right. So we got the rooster selected, but really the rooster is not what I want to work on. I want to work on the background again. So I'm going to go to the subject. I'm going to invert it. Okay. But again, because I use the plus or add brush, I need to convert that to subtract. Okay, so now I have the background selected, and I'm just going to bring the exposure way down. There's a little bit right here that I probably have to clean up, but you get the idea. Okay, so now I can, darken down the background, add blacks, whites, shadows. And again, I can, if I take the clarity down, it'll sort of put it a little more out of focus. Now, again, the masking tools in Photoshop, I can go in there and mask, and I can add a blur to the background if I had to. All right, so that's, again, inverting it. I want to brighten his eye a little bit. So I'm going to add a new mask. I'm going to use the radial gradient. And let's select his eye. Let's feather it a little more. If I can get to it. Let's feather it a little more over here. Okay, and just brighten it just a little bit. And you can saturate it if you want to saturate it more. Okay, so that's just the little eye mask. And again, I'm not naming them. It says mask 2, mask 1. That doesn't make any sense. So you'd eye brightener, eye sparkle, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so if I turn that off and on, it just made it a little bit brighter, right on his eye. All right. Okay, so that's the select subject again. Adding with the brushes, turning the auto mask on and off, and then inverting it. But remember, you have to invert both the subject and the add brush. All right. How are we doing for time anyhow? I'm trying to go as fast as I can so we can open up the mics and you can teach me.
8:15. You're doing okay as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. I think I'm saving the best for last, right? Because I have a number of images and I want to do the same technique to all 4 images. Here's the image right here. And this, Bill will remember this. This is from the photo or the outing we did at the Opportunity House Golf. And this guy was a little bit backlit. Now, I don't think I have anything done to him globally. So this is just straight out of the camera. So nothing's been edited here at all. So what I want to do is I want to brighten the golfer up and darken the sky down, and maybe bring up some of the shadows in the background trees and brighten that up a little bit. So I'm going to go to my masking tools. This time the select subject does a pretty good job. So if I choose select subject, it finds the golfer. Oh, that's so cool. And you have that in Photoshop. So the Photoshop has the select subject techniques also over there. So I'm going to exaggerate this. I'm going to really brighten them up. Okay, so there. Okay, so I really brighten him up just so, and let me push it even farther because I want to do something a little bit later too. Okay, so now he's really bright. And what I want to do is now I want to invert the mask. So let me call this one golfer. All right, we're going to duplicate that mask. Okay, and we're going to invert it. So now it's working on the background. Let's call this one background. Okay, so with the background, I really don't want to brighten it. I can darken it. Don't want to go that far. I don't want to really change the exposure of the background at all. So what I want to do is I want to bring up the shadows a little bit. So you can see the trees are getting brighter. Maybe I desaturate a little bit. I can put them on a black and white if I take the saturation the whole way down. So now we have the background that was created from a copy, but inverse from the golfer. Right, let's do one more. Let's select the sky. What you're going to see here is his hat is too close to the sky color. So this one, let me name it sky. Now to name it, I'm double clicking on the mask name, and that's where that's popping up. So I can name them, so I can identify them a lot easier. Okay, now here, let me zoom in. I'm using Control+ on my keyboard. You can see it has his hat selected. It has part of his glove selected, and it even has a little bit part of his neck selector right here. It's also missed this piece right here because it found the sky and it stopped at that strong edge. So it didn't pick up that little piece right there. So we need to add this piece. We need to subtract his hat. So on the sky mask, I'm going to subtract with the brush. Make sure the auto mask is turned on because we want to paint within this line. All right, let's subtract his hat. And I think it has a little bit of this selected. I need to make the brush smaller. Let's subtract his gloves up here. I'm doing this real quick, so I'm not being real careful here. I think the piece of his gloves actually in that sky selection too. So let's get rid of that. All right, now I need to add. So I need to add this piece right here between his arms. So I'm going to use the add button. I'm going to use a brush again. Auto mask is still turned on over in my masking tools over here. And let's add this little piece right in here. And that edge is strong enough, but it wasn't smart enough to know that that was not part of his shirt. That's part of the sky. All right, that's good enough. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that sky and I'll just bring down the exposure a little bit, dehaze it a little bit, saturate it a bit. Let me zoom out. I'll go overboard. You can see it's only affecting the sky. So I have a sky mask, I have a background mask, and I have a golfer mask. All right. So now what I have is let me close the masking tools by clicking on the mask button up there again. Now what I have, let me zoom out. I have the same golfer because I had my camera, shoot and spray and shoot or whatever you call it. Okay, so I have him in his swing. He's starting, he's swinging through, and he's finishing. So I have 3 other images of the same golfer, and this is another shot of the same golfer, okay, at a different angle. So I want to add the same adjustments to all of those shots. Okay, so I'm going to select the one that I want to synchronize from, which is the one I edited with all the masks. And this will also, you can also do global settings over here. You can do the details, the sharpening, everything. And I'm going to select, let me bring this up so you can see what I'm doing at the bottom of my screen. All right, so this is the one I edited. So that's one I have selected. I'm going to hold the shift key down. I'm going to select all of these images. So now I have all these other images over here selected along with the original one. And I'm going to use the synchronize, the sync button right here at the bottom of your panels. Now I have all these, everything turned off. Okay, now if I wanted to sync all the basic settings, I'd turn them all on, or individual basic settings. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sync the masks. So this is like copying these masks to the other images. Okay, and I want to sync all of them. So I'm going to select all the masks, sky, background, and golfer. Click on synchronize. And it's going to add those masks to all of the other images. The problem is we use the select subject and select sky. And the select subject and sky is not exactly the same in these other ones. So I'm going to select this one. I'm going to my masking tool. You see these little exclamation points right here? Okay, the sky needs to be updated. And why don't I see it? The sky needs to be updated. So remember, the sky had all 3 of these. So I need to update the sky. I need to go to the background and update that one. And update the golfer. Okay, so now all of them have the same thing. The sky, the brush. Oh, I use the subtract here. Okay. Okay, so subtract, I need to get rid of that. And this one, I need to get rid of that. All right. Okay, so now the golfer has been selected and it's synchronized the exact same settings as the other one. So I'm going to update this golfer. It's going to go in and intelligently select that. I'm going to go to the background and update that. And it's going to change the background. So all of them are now synchronized. If I go to the next one and do the update and the golfer update, and the sky update. And the problem with the sky is because I added, subtracted, the add and subtract is in the wrong spots. So I might get rid of those. I might get rid of those. Okay. And if I go through all of them, you'll get the idea. So the background can be updated here, the golfer can be updated here. And even though it's not even the same angle, it's doing the same adjustments. Okay, but I made the golfer too bright, right? I think I did. So I need to deselect everything. So I'm going to click on the chicken first. And I'm going to click on the original one. I'm going to go to the golfer. Okay, and that's that subject selection, right? And I brought the exposure up way too much. So I'm going to bring down the exposure some. Maybe I open up the shadows, bring down the highlights. So now what I've done is I've edited the golfer in that original one again. So I'm going to select that one again, hold the shift key down and select all the other ones, synchronize it. And I don't want to synchronize the sky or the background. I just want to synchronize the golfer. Okay, so basically I'm going to update the golfer settings in all of the other ones. Okay, and when I click on synchronize, the next step is really important. It's going to ask you, do you want to replace the golfers? And that's what I did the first time because it kind of made sense. I want to replace the golfer. But if I click on replace, it's going to replace all of the masks. I want to merge them. I want to merge this golfer setting into the other images. Okay, so now if I go to this one, okay, the golfer settings have been merged. Okay, and same with this one. So I'm not replacing the mask, I'm synchronizing the settings, I'm merging the settings of that mask. So I don't have to go through all 5 or 6 or whatever that series and do all of these sliders back and forth all over again. I didn't have to go into each one of them and go through, create new masks, select the subject, create another mask, invert it with the background. All I'm doing is I'm synchronizing all those masks across 4 or 5 different images.
I think that answers David's question. He was wondering if there was a way to flatten the masks as you can with layers in Photoshop to make it a mask.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think so, because they're not really, they look like layers, but they're not really layers. They're just mask adjustments is what they are. So, you know, I've been looking to do that also, just to flatten and make it all permanent. But if you're going to do that, I think I would do that in Photoshop. Unless somebody else has that answer. Jeff, do you have the answer? I haven't asked Jeff. David, any other questions?
Can you, Charlie had a question. Can you quickly switch between add and subtract by using command key? You can,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, let me do that over here. Okay. What I'm going to do over here is I'll make a new mask. And let's just do another radial gradient, and I'll just select this centerpiece. All right, so remember, whatever is red is what's being selected. Okay, and let me just bring up the exposure so you can see something there. Okay, so if I subtract, for instance, I don't want to bring up the exposure of that leaf. Okay, so let me zoom in. Okay, and I want to subtract with the brush. Auto mask is turned on, and let's make the brush bigger. And I'm going to go outside so you can see it. Okay, so I'm out here. Oops, I went too far. So what I can do is I can do the opposite, and that's the Option or Alt key on your keyboard. So I don't have to switch to another brush. I just made a mistake, so I'm going to use the Alt key and brush it back in. So right now I'm subtracting, so the Alt key will add it back in. So if I had an add brush going, the Alt key would subtract it. With the Alt key, you can see it's changing the icon from minus to plus. Okay, Thanks for reminding me. I forgot to mention that. So you're just doing the opposite of what the brush is set up to do. Okay, so it's not the shift key because I'm already subtracting. So the shift key is not really going to do anything. It's the alt key is going to just do the opposite, so if that makes sense. Any other comments, questions?
Seems like it's pretty darn good at selecting edges.
It's not bad, but I'm used to doing things in Photoshop. So in Photoshop, you can go in and you can
Yeah.
really fine tune the edges in Photoshop. One of the things I mentioned is you don't have a rectangle tool. Okay, so how could you possibly edit something in a square shape? You really can't select or mask in a square here, but there's a workaround. So let me show you the intersect technique. And I'm going to go back to, I think, this one to do that. Yeah, this one. Okay, let me close the masks. Let me push this down a little bit so it's out of the way. Say you wanted to, just have a shaft of light right down the middle of this thing. Okay, I'll do this because it'll be obvious what I'm doing. Or you wanted to, select something in a square in the middle. There's no, if I go over to the masking tools, there's no add square. And I think Jay, you asked, there's no selection tools here really. So in Photoshop, you have a rectangle selection tool. There is no such thing here. You're masking with either the brush or the AI techniques up here. I didn't use the linear gradient yet. I'm going to use the linear gradient. In Photoshop, you have all these different gradient tools. You have the repeat gradient, you have the star gradient, you have the square gradient, you have all kinds of different types of gradients. Here it's just a linear gradient or the radial gradient. So with the linear gradient turned on, what you're going to do is you're going to click and drag in the direction where you want the gradient to fade. So a common filter is a soft neutral density filter, right? So you click on the top and you drag down, and whatever's under the red is what's selected. That's where it's strongest up here, and it fades away. That's that soft neutral density filter. So if I come over here and bring down the exposure, they got that edge to it. Okay, so here's where I started. That's where it's 100%. This is the pin in the middle, so I can move it up and down. And this down here is the fade. So now it's fading from 100% the whole way down to 0 down at the bottom down here. So if I shorten it, it's going to all happen within that space right here. So this is the fade distance right here. You can rotate it. If I wanted to do this straight, I would have pulled it down with the shift key held down. So if I rotate it around like this, okay, and let me move the pin more towards the center, and I'm going to pull this out over here. Okay, so instead of darkening it, I'm going to bring up the exposure. Okay, so it's doing it from 100% from here the whole way back. It's fading away from this pin over to this white pin over here. And if I go over the pin, you can see that soft edge. But what I want to do is I want to have it fade out this side and this side. So now what you do is you come over here to your linear gradient, that triple dot button, and you intersect the mask with another linear gradient. And this time I'm going to drag from here out to this side. Okay, and let me bring up the exposure. So you can see it's happening in the center instead of from this side over, because I'm intersecting the two. All right, so now I can make a dark spot down the middle or a bright spot up the middle. Okay, so there's no repeat gradient in this program. That's something you do have in Photoshop. So what you can do is you can intersect two of the gradient tools to do that. And if I do it again, intersect mask with another linear gradient, I go from here up, and I do it again. This is a lot of work. I'd rather do this in Photoshop. Another linear gradient and do it from here down. Now it's only affecting where the four gradients are intersecting. So let me push it way up or way down. If you want stronger edges, you just bring those gradient buttons a little bit closer. So for instance, this one, remember it's coming from here over, okay? You just bring it and you tighten it on that side. This is a lot of work. I would not do this if I wanted a square of adjustment there. I'd take this into Photoshop and do that in Photoshop. But you can intersect any of these brushes or any of the gradients, the radial gradient on top of a linear gradient if you wanted to. I'm gonna delete this mask. Okay, so if I start a new one and I say, okay, radial gradient, and I pull it out like this, let me tighten up that feather. Right, so what I want here is I want to have a straight line down the middle or something like that. So you intersect, or I want to just have a pattern in here. I come in here and I choose intersect with a brush. All right, and then what I can do is I can just paint. And it's only going to give me the brush where it's intersecting with that radial gradient. So you can see where I'm hitting the edges, it's cutting me off. So now my new mask is the intersection of the radial gradient and that brush. And then you can come over here and do whatever you want. Right. So remember, you have the intersect, and you can intersect more than two if you need to. And then again, you can inverse any of these. So if I come over here and inverse the radial gradient, then it's only going to show me the brush that's outside the edge of the radial gradient. Now there's one, and I couldn't find it. There was a place where I needed to select the sky, but the dome of the building, I wanted to pull it out. So I intersected the radial gradient with the sky, made it a lot easier, and then inverted one on top of the other. Right, that's all I got for now. I mean, we could go on and on with all these tools. There's a lot of good stuff out there on YouTube also. I don't remember all the shortcuts, but I know that if you wanted to show the overlay, it's the O on your keyboard. So if I wanted to toggle the show overlay on and off, you can see in the bottom of my mask, it's showing and hiding the overlay. If I close the gradient tools or the masking tools, if you want to show the before and after, it's the backspace key. So the backslash key will show you the before and the after. Okay, so if you want to compare, that way you don't have to come down here and turn on that before and after button down here. So the backslash key will turn off all of your settings, including any of your global settings and also your masks. If you just want to turn off the mask, you go back in the masking panel and use that little toggle right here, and it's just hiding the mask settings instead of all of the global settings. And you can turn them off and on one at a time with the little eyeballs. The triple dot button is a way of deleting the mask, okay, or deleting all the masks. So if I delete all the masks, all the masks go away. Right? Who wants to open up the mics and add their tips? Let me bring you guys down here so I'm looking at you instead of up above you.
I don't have any more tips. You just showed me some things I never knew before. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, good. That's what I was hoping.
Now,
I don't-
Bob, where, Bob, did you get your initial training about this? Did you take online tutorials or what? Just
Yeah.
learn it on YouTube or what?
Well, I've used Photoshop, seems like forever. And I started using Lightroom and I felt like it was really confusing because I was used to Photoshop. So I did I did teach it, so I got the classroom in a book. That's where I started. Adobe has a whole series of what they call classroom in a book. They're like intro level reference books. And then that Lightroom magazine, I used to subscribe to it. I'm constantly learning new techniques from those magazines. Let me turn off my share here. So, yeah, YouTube, definitely. Magazines, that Kelby one, that Lightroom user magazine, and the Photoshop user magazine are excellent. But if you just Google best tips and tricks for Lightroom, you're going to get a whole list of YouTube videos.
We put the Kelby one in the chat. It's like the very first thing in there.
Yes.
And what is that woman's name? Julianne Cost.
Yeah.
Oh, from the Adobe
Yeah.
Evangelist. Yeah, if you go on the Adobe site, that's the place to start, definitely.
Going to the Adobe site and really letting the Adobe people show you how to use it she's a master at it. So look for anything by Julianne Cost, K-O-S-T, and she will be a really good teacher.
Yeah, and she actually has a lot of these new features right now that they're worth taking a look at. I'm shutting down Lightroom so that I can see you guys a little bit easier.
I also put in the in this Facebook group a link to the Photoshop. I don't know what they call it now, but it's like 3 or 5 days of all Photoshop learning. That's
Conference.
free. Yeah, so check out the Facebook page for that link, because I learned a lot there too.
Oh, that's from the Adobe, the official Adobe conference.
And it's not official Adobe, but it's all about Photoshop.
Dave
Okay.
Cross runs it.
Thank you, Dave Cross. I couldn't think of his name.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there have been 3 of them.
Yeah.
Anybody
really-
else have any tips, tricks?
Dave Cross is, he starts his new one the first week of May, I think, because I'm signed up for it.
Yeah, I have the link in the
Okay.
Facebook page.
Mhm.
Definitely. Yeah, it's May. I believe you're right, Barbara. It's May.
And I checked and looked at Camera Raw, and it has almost the exact same thing that Lightroom does for the masking.
Mhm.
So I wanted to see how close it was. I don't use Lightroom that much. I usually use Camera Raw, and I know that they're almost identical getting that way. I wanted to see how close it was. So
Yeah, the Camera Raw, you're not working out of a catalog. It's worth starting to use Lightroom because of the catalog feature.
but see, I don't use the catalog.
And this- and the-
Mine are mostly, I don't do series. Most of mine are portrait type of things. So,
Mhm.
and I have my own catalog. So
Yeah.
as working in IT, I learned that a long time ago.
The thing I like is the synchronize. Synchronizing in Lightroom is really, really handy. It really speeds things up for me. You can synchronize any of your adjustments from one image to the other. For instance, I was at Middle Creek and I had some dust on my sensor. It was in the exact same spot in every image. So I can touch it once in the first image and synchronize that spot healing brush through the entire series of images. I don't have to find that dust spot in every image that way.
I just
Because
like going back and forth out of Photoshop into Camera Raw, back into Photoshop again, where you can't do that in Lightroom. That's the other piece. But that's
you can go from Lightroom and edit in Photoshop, so you can do your initial edits, because in Lightroom that's basically what you're doing. You're doing Camera Raw, because nothing is permanent or destructive. And if you right click on it, you can bounce that into Photoshop. And you can bounce into Photoshop in different ways. You can bounce into Photoshop with the Lightroom techniques active or not, because there's no text tool in Lightroom, not really. There's no drawing tools in Lightroom. There's no refined mask in Lightroom. So Photoshop has a lot more complex, but a lot a lot more sophisticated masking tools than Lightroom does. Lightroom's pretty good because you can do a lot of quick masks there. The advantage of Lightroom is it makes your adjustments faster. In Lightroom, you have to add all these crazy adjustment layers, but the masking tools are much better. And that's what Jenny's going to show you next month, right, Jenny? Or composites. You're going to show composites.
It's about composites. It's not really about masking, but
Yeah.
there's absolutely going to be masking involved.
Yeah. Okay.
But you're definitely better at masking than I am.
Oh, I don't know about that.
We'll see. It's just, yeah.
If only we had unlimited time to watch the videos on the Adobe site with Julianne Cost and numerous other online sources of information. Oh, I mean, you could spend a whole year nonstop learning things.
Every time I think I know enough, I go online. I'm like, what do I feel stupid? I never knew that tool was there. I forgot about this tool because you keep going back to the same tools over and over and over. And that's why I keep going to those magazines. I keep going online because sometimes I forget that feature is there because I keep doing the same thing because you normally shoot the same type of images and you forget, oh yeah, the luminosity masks. I've been using Select Sky all along. And you saw that luminosity mask was better than the Select Sky in a lot of times. Yeah. I know every time I get into Lightroom, I try to do something and it's not there. It's in Photoshop. The different shaped brushes, for instance, or the refined edges that we have in Photoshop, where some of the drawing tools. I wanted to select something in a shape of letters, and I couldn't do it in Lightroom. I just got so frustrated. That's in Photoshop. You can do that in Photoshop. You can't do that here. And all the different filters you have over in Photoshop that aren't here, they're very useful. So hopefully this helped you guys.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Adjustment
Got you
layers
going.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for Bob?
Any comments? Hopefully it helped.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Bob.
You're welcome. All right, that's all I have.
I think we're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks,
Really
Bob.
helpful.
It was
I
great.
was
Very,
hoping
very,
you
very
guys
good.
would share with me. I was hoping I was going to learn all kinds of stuff from you guys. So But we can do this again. And maybe we can do this on an off night too. There's plenty of time since we can do it in Zoom. If we want to set something up on an off night, we can do that. All right. All right, Ginny, you're next. I can't wait to show you or see what you show us.
And in between, we have the macro person.
Macro. Yep.
So
that's in
that's in 2 weeks. So that'll be great. And don't forget to check your newsletter for that. I don't know, I don't think it was in this last one, but the one before that, the thing that has to do with the historical pictures.
Oh, that's right.
I think I'll spend a little bit of time reminding people about that at the beginning of my presentation, because there's some really neat ideas there that I think.
Yeah, I
Getting
should have wrote
me
that in my
get
notes
on.
because I forgot about that too. We should start thinking about it.
Yeah,
We got
really
all
getting on board with that.
Yep. Yep.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be. Hopefully it is.
Yeah.
Yep. I got some ideas. Hopefully you don't have the same ones.
No, I'm sure I don't. All right. See you guys in 2 weeks.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Good night.
Hey, hey, Jeff.
Hey, Jay, you need to stop recording.
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Okay.
There we go.